I'm noticing a theme with many of my podcast episodes around sitting in discomfort. So much of how Christ does things requires us to leave what feels easy and comfortable to stretch and grow in ways we wouldn't have otherwise. That is certainly the case with peacemaking. Building bridges, practicing empathy, addressing conflict all require something deep from us, and He is calling us to be peacemakers now. I hope today's episode gives you some ideas to take action on and a new perspective, not only in how you look at others, but also how you look at yourself. Welcome to Measure of Her Creation. Welcome to another episode. I'm so excited to have Maybree Spilsbury with me today, who works for Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Welcome, Maybree.
Thank you, Michaela.
So the reason I wanted Maybree to come on the show is because peacemaking and peace building has been heavy on my mind, and I think it's heavy on a lot of people's minds. But I also find myself not knowing exactly how to apply it in my life and take action in my personal relationships. So first of all, tell us what you are doing. What's your role right now, and what are you working on?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm working for Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and it's a fairly new role, but I am the peacemaking consultant at the moment that helps with all of their peacemaking efforts across the whole organization. So I guess first, what MWEG is it's a nonpartisan, faith-based organization, and they advocate for civic empowerment and also ethical governments. So a big tenet of theirs is doing things peacefully and proactively. And so what they're interested in is equipping women with the information and training and opportunities to help women become more civically engaged and then be able to participate in politics meaningfully. And so peace is a huge part of that. And I think we often misunderstand peace as peacekeeping, right? Like we ought to keep the status quo and not ruffle any feathers, not stir the pot. And so, especially in our culture, we really hesitate to jump straight into things and confront them. So a lot of what I do is helping people re-examine what peace actually looks like and what it looks like for each person and what that leads them to do in the civic world and in their own lives.
Yeah, I think that is a new concept to me, that peacekeeping and peace building or peacemaking are very separate concepts. And so that's what got me so excited to have this conversation. So what are the courses that you're developing right now?
We just launched our first one, Conflict Resolution for Beginners. So this is a small cohort that meets together to talk about a personal conflict that they are bringing to work on. So they get a workshop this conflict that they have in their life over the course of 5 weeks together. So that's one. And then some other ones that we're developing for the future are how to deal with conflicts at church and how do you navigate conflict with people in this political environment where misinformation is rampant and maybe you're operating with a set of facts that other people see differently, or maybe they have a different set of facts. So the news and media is just a really hard place to navigate our differences right now. And so we're going to look at a conflict course on that. And then also looking at family conflict. This is, I think, where most people experience conflict in the most painful ways. So kind of how to engage in that better. And then we're also looking at doing an introductory course on nonviolence. So this is nonviolent resistance. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., that type of idea of what does that actually look like and how can we do that in our communities?
That is so exciting and so needed. I love that. And I think the piece about families is especially interesting because that's where we tend to peacekeep the most, I think. We brush things under the rug. We try and act like nothing has happened when that actually can drive disconnection rather than connect on things, even if we see them differently. So I love that that is a key part of those courses.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we're like most vulnerable with our families and like, or that's like one of the most vulnerable relationships that we have. And so we do a lot to like put walls up and protect ourselves. So yeah, sometimes it is easier to just avoid those things. But yeah, like you said, it like cuts off a lot of growth and beauty in those relationships and makes them more surface level, which is the opposite of what we want.
So you are a professional peace builder. Is that kind of what you would call yourself?
I mean, that's a bold claim to make. Just a funny story. I'm living with my little sister right now. I'm the oldest, she's the youngest, and we've been living together for a few months. And she recently told me, I haven't really seen any of your peace skills yet. Like, what are you talking about that you like study this? So even though I've done a lot of studying and this is what I work in, it's still so hard. And so I don't think anyone masters peace, but this is like my bread and butter. Like I love thinking about it and doing things and thinking about how to continually show up in our conflicts, even when it's super hard. But yeah, so I don't know about professional, but
Well, that's comforting, honestly, because I'm a therapist and it doesn't mean I'm perfect at
yeah.
peace building myself or avoiding conflict or having hard conversations all the time. So we're all works in progress. But tell me what led you to this path.
Yeah, there's so many things I could point to, but I think growing up, I was always really interested in like controversial topics or things that people disagreed on. And I loved just like listening to people hash things out and figuring out how they were going to like get from point A to point B. And that was always something that was really interesting to me. A lot of people I grew up with know me as like bringing up a lot of debate topics a lot, just because I like loved getting into like, what do we disagree on? And like, I think
That's
I've
unique.
always I know. I actually, in most of my classes and just like this community, I do think a lot of people study conflict because they avoid it, because they want to get better at it and they're not happy with how they're currently doing it. And I think I came from it on the opposite side where I almost was a little bit too confrontational and like wanted to win arguments. And so I'm like, hey, this isn't working. How do I get better? And of course, I avoid and all the other things too in different circumstances. But yeah, I think I just was energized by conflicts and I just wanted to understand like how you disagree better. And so I feel like a really big point was I served my mission on Temple Square. And if you know anything about the Temple Square mission, you have women from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, languages coming and living in really close proximity with each other. And it's not a normal mission where you like sometimes interact with other missionaries. You're always with missionaries. Like that's just you're living on top of one another. And that can be really hard, especially when you have all these different perspectives. And we had this joke that common sense isn't common sense at Temple Square because we all have different ideas of what that means. So that was like a little like petri dish or like an experiment for me of what it was like to exist with so much difference and how you like accomplish something so amazing. And so, yes, we all had a common goal and a common mission, and we were all united in this idea of being missionaries and following the gospel. But I think like on another level, it was because we accepted everyone as they were. Like we wanted everyone to bring their differences. We wanted everyone to bring their different styles and food and languages. Like that was something that we really prided ourselves on. And I think that like learning how to accept each other as we are instead of coming to this conformity was a way that I saw peace actively happening. And it didn't mean there wasn't any conflict. Peace doesn't mean there's no conflict. Peace means we lean into the conflict in a way that transforms it into something beautiful or something bigger than ourselves. So that I think is kind of where it started for me.
I love that transformational peacemaking idea. I think we'll jump into that later, but I think it can dig into our souls in a way that avoiding conflict never can. When you
Yeah.
actually face difference, and it doesn't necessarily mean changing your opinion, but it's really understanding why you feel the way you feel and why someone else feels the way they feel. Like with those sister missionaries, why do they dress the way they do or act the way they do? I mean, I felt the same way on my mission as well. I served in Zambia and Malawi, and so I served mostly with African sisters, and there were times where I just completely did not understand why they did the things they did, but that was so beautiful and part of my growth. So tell me
Yeah.
more. What was next in your journey?
So yeah, then I went to Utah State for my undergrad and started studying global communication. That was my major. And it was kind of because of this Temple Square experience where I was thinking like, oh, intercultural, like how do we communicate? How do we live together? And I think what really interested me was how do we have conflict together? And how do we not just tolerate each other, but like learn to live in community with one another? And so that led me down this more conflict path. And I took some classes there. So Utah State has so many cool things happening there, and one is the Spacemaking program. So I was involved in what we call Spacemaking, where we offer one-on-one interactions with people so people can sign up to have space made for them. And what you do is you're a mirror for whatever they're experiencing. So you said you're a therapist. There's lots of similarities. It's different than therapy because we're not trained. And there's obviously things that are better dealt with in therapy than something like this. But oftentimes we just need to talk and we need a witness without people giving us advice or telling us what to do or trying to fix things. And so that was where I became very acquainted with what does it look like to sit with someone in suffering, and also what does it look like to be grounded myself. That idea you sitting with someone, we had 4 principles. One was self-determination, so believing that they are capable of making their own choices and I don't know better than they do for their own experience. And second is human dignity, so honoring the dignity of them. The third one was, a belief that everyone is capable of change. So even if people are so set in patterns and ways, having someone that believes they're capable of change is a really powerful thing to experience. And then 4 is an ethic of care. So how do we create a space where that person can talk about their conflicts and talk about relationships and inner conflicts, and how do you hold space for someone doing that? So that was lit me on fire. I loved meeting people in that moment of intense conflict and not fixing it, not telling them what to do, but just being a place where they could delve into it and figure it out a bit more.
Which takes practice. I think our
Yeah.
natural inclination is to fix. If someone shares something that is difficult, we want to say, oh, well, this is how you can get better. Or I can see this so clearly from the outside, just do this. And then when
Yeah.
it comes to people expressing things that we don't agree with, I think it's really rare to even have a space where we have to just sit and listen.
Yeah.
That's uncommon.
That makes me think of there were times when, and this was in Utah, so there's lots of people who have different experiences on the spectrum with the church, right? But there'd be people who I was making space for who would talk about faith crises or talk about things that they weren't sure about anymore. And I want to jump in and save them, right? Or jump in and
Yes.
explain what they're dealing with and give them the facts or the reasons or bear my testimony or something. And I had to not do that. I had to let them struggle with it. And if they decided from that their journey that they needed to leave the church, how could I accept that, right? And how can I give them space to do what they needed to do? And that was a moment where like you said, it takes practice. I just want people to do what I think is going to bring them happiness, right? And I think a big part of conflict and peace, kind of this bigger picture, is peace looks different for everybody. And there's no right way or wrong way to experience that peace and alignment. And that's a big part of if you're putting yourself in this work, you have to trust that people are on their own path and are going to do what's best for them. And mistakes are part of that. But just learning to let people define that for themselves was a really important part for me figuring all this out.
Not jumping in to fix someone, I feel is the greatest act of trust you can offer
Yeah.
someone. Trust in
And
their
it's hard.
capability. And it's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
But that's so cool that that's a program at Utah State. What a
Yeah,
cool
it is.
practice.
It's so cool. And yeah, it's still going strong. So I guess to kind of go from there. So I had this breakthrough moment that I think kind of, again, led me further down this path. I was sitting in a class. It was actually a science class. And we were talking about atom bonding. And I am not scientifically minded at all. Science classes are I just hate them. I would love to love them, but I don't. And my brain just is not wired that way. But I was sitting in a class. And this was a time where I was realizing that the way we talk about conflict, we always talk about it as compromise is the way that you deal with conflict, right? That's like its best form is when people can meet in the middle and or like agree to disagree or find common ground. Like it was always this effort of like both people coming together and compromising something that they believe in to just be able to agree together. And I was really unsatisfied with that. So I was sitting in a science class at Utah State and we were talking about atom bonding, and often we hear that opposites attract. But in the case of atoms, that's actually not true because one has positive energy, one has negative energy. Those are going to do everything they can to repel each other. Like these atoms don't want to be together because they're positive and negative. And only under intense heat and friction and speed can these atoms get close enough where their nucleus bonds. They have to be in the right conditions with a lot of extreme pressure and heat or conflict in order for the core to connect. And what that does is it creates an entirely new structure, right? It was like so exciting for me when I realized it because it's not that the positive became less positive and the negative became less negative or, they didn't balance each other out. They actually formed an entirely new structure. And that's what like our whole world is made up out of different combinations of these differences and positives and negatives. And I just think that was so eye-opening to me to realize that that's what conflict can be. Like conflict actually is the conduit or like the conditions that enable us to bring our differences and not lessen them or not fight or not just decide to not be together, but to like really engage and create something from it. So again, that transformation I think was, really enlightening to me.
So beautiful. What would you say the difference is between conflict and contention? Because obviously we believe from the Book of Mormon that contention is of the devil, like it is against the spirit of God, but conflict is something that we can lean into. What would you say the difference is?
I would say conflict is neutral. Conflict is going to appear because we exist and because we're human. Conflict is essentially points of differences that seem like they're irreconcilable. And so that's going to happen like every day. I have several inner conflicts a day, right? Like conflict is going to happen. Contention to me is when we have like this disgust or this contempt for the other, where we need them to be like us, or else there's just this like us versus them attitude. And I think that when we have intolerance for other people's positions or views or ways of being, that's contention. Like that need to get everyone on the same page or else be separate feels contentious. And it makes sense that we conflate the two because conflict brings up a lot of unpleasant feelings because it's uncomfortable. But it takes a lot of training to learn how to experience anger and experience frustration and not push that on the other person. And that's when contention comes in, is when we direct it at the person that we're experiencing difference with rather than processing it in ourselves and figuring out how to move forward.
Oh, that was beautifully said. Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, so this was the distinguishing factor between conflict resolution and conflict transformation. So I knew that I wanted to go to grad school. I knew I wanted to like dig deeper into this idea and figure out like, okay, this metaphor, it's beautiful, it's exciting, but how do you actually do that? Like that is so hard to actually experience transformation when you're in a conflict. So I was looking at grad programs and most of them are like I think Harvard has like the 10 steps to resolving conflict. And I was like, that's not how it works. And I'm sure the program at Harvard is great, but I just really wanted to find somewhere that really alluded to how messy this process is and how it's not this straightforward, these are the skills and strategies to deal with conflict. So I ended up going to Eastern Mennonite University, and they have the Center for Justice and Peace Building there. And it was like, I still am like shocked that this worked out as well as it did, but it's in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. I didn't know anything really about Mennonites. I knew I loved Virginia, but I had never been to the Shenandoah Valley. And it's like 2 hours south of DC. And so I just decided to go there because it like resonated with my soul, like the way that they talked about it. And the program, the degree is conflict transformation. So exactly what I had been thinking about right there in the name. And so I went there for grad school and it was just mind blowing. Like I really loved learning from Mennonites because they have this really robust peace theology and they really believe in nonviolence, and that's like their core commitment. So everything they do in the world is in this attitude of peace, but also like very active peace. Like we talked about how Mormon Women for Ethical Government believes that peace is proactive and it requires us putting ourselves into these situations. And that's exactly how I experienced the Mennonites that I became friends with and interacted with. Was they really involve themselves in their community and in politics and in issues in other parts of the world that touch them. Like they are very active in making sure that they're doing something to create more peace in the world. And so I really loved learning from them and how they see it.
Was grad school an obvious next step, or did you feel any pushback or fear to do that? Like, how did you find that confirmation from God to go forward?
Yeah, it felt very impractical, like financially and also like to study conflict transformation. Like every time I said I study, that's what I'm studying, people would be like, okay. And like they
What
didn't
do
really
you
know
do
how
with
to
that?
respond to that. Exactly. That's the most common question is, so what do you do with that? And I didn't know. Like I had no idea what was next. I did have ideas or wishes, but I genuinely didn't see a path forward. And again, yeah, it just didn't really make sense to move across the country to somewhere that you know, I don't know, like I didn't really know what I was getting into. But I think that like I mentioned, it resonated with my soul. It felt like something, like a place I was called to. And I don't feel like I had any spiritual confirmation. Obviously, there was a lot of prayer that went into it, but it just kind of felt like an open door. The way I explain it is like there was energy there, and I was just following where I felt energy, where I felt excitement. And that often I feel like is how God works with me, is just like following what I feel excitement about and passion about.
Yeah, I call that flow. I feel the flow.
Flow. Yes, that's exactly what it felt like. And also, I just knew that I didn't have enough education and experience to then go and like do this in the world quite yet with what I wanted. Like I knew that I needed more grounding and more experience. And so, yeah, it felt like a leap of faith.
I'm sure you learned a lot curriculum-wise, but I am also curious what you learned just from being surrounded by Mennonites. I actually spent the summer in Pennsylvania this last summer, and so I was surrounded by Amish and Mennonites, and I loved being around their culture. So, yeah, I'm just curious, being immersed in their culture, what you learned from them, even personally.
Oh, so much. I already mentioned like the peace and very active participation they have in the world. I think also like it was really beautiful to come from being immersed in my own culture to then being immersed in another culture where I wasn't the dominant religion and, I
Yeah,
wasn't part
so
of their
different.
group. And it was beautiful. Like it, for one, gave me a lot of insight into how maybe people are perceiving things from the outside. It was actually kind of funny. Every time I told Mormons I was going to a Mennonite school and Mennonites I was going to a Mormon, or that I was Mormon, I would get the same, like, people had the same image in their mind. And so there's a lot of misconceptions around like who Mennonites are and who Mormons are. So that was one, just like really fun to kind of interact with that. But yeah, like I really loved like their cohesive sense of community, and they really did feel like wide open arms. Like I was kind of like examining my own faith and my own relationship with the church during grad school and even before that, and this just felt like a very like soft place to land in all of that. Like it was very I don't know how to explain it. Like the Shenandoah Valley, like just the land itself and then also the communities that are there just felt like a very safe place to really like wrestle with my faith and wrestle with all these like big things that I was dealing with conflict and what that looks like in the world. And like there's a lot going on in the world. It felt like rest to my soul to just be in a place where I was being nurtured by this community that wasn't even mine, and yet I feel very, very close to what they are. And there's so many similarities between Mennonites and my own culture that just felt like another sense of home. And yeah, that's not really like concrete things that I learned from them, but just like their way of being and like holding space, I think was really beautiful to experience.
Especially at that transformational time for you, because that is a scary
Yeah.
thing to experience, but to land in a place where you could be comfortable and accepted, even in your questioning and learning, that's really important.
It really is. Like, some of my friends would come to church with me, or I would go to church with them, and like we had like Monday night, like people would come over to my house and we'd all just talk about religion and like our own faiths. And like it was just beautiful. Like no one ever tried convincing me to do one thing or another, but just I felt very safe to just figure it all out, and it was a beautiful gift.
You're making me want to go to grad school there, honestly.
It's the best. I can't say enough about it.
So you graduated recently, right?
Yes.
And now you just started at Mormon Women for Ethical Government.
Yeah. Yeah, I was expecting to struggle for a lot longer before I got a job that I actually like felt like I was doing what I studied. Like I got a job at a Montessori school right after grad school just because I like could not find anything else. And yeah, like I think I came away from that experience of grad school wanting to be a conflict facilitator, like getting groups that were in conflict, like communities or workplaces, families, and just creating like processes for them to engage in conflict together. Um, and just like, yeah, how do you figure out conflict as a group? That was really interesting to me. Like, I think at the kind of prevailing thing throughout all of my grad school experience was I want to work with my community. I wanted to work and like take these things that I've been learning and bring them to my own faith community. And so working with Mormon Women for Ethical Government is like a dream come true.
Yes.
I feel like they're so aligned with the things that I've been learning and the things that I care about. And like what I talked about with Mennonites, like doing so much good in the world and being very active. Like it feels so divine that this is an opportunity that I have now to work for them and with them. And like I said, I was expecting to struggle for a lot longer before something like this happened. But it just kind of goes to show, like, when you do follow what you have energy or what you feel like you're called to, and I really do feel like God was in all of this, like there were moments where I was like, that was a waste. Like, did I really just like study that for 2 years? And the world doesn't want that. Like the world doesn't want to do conflict transformation. But I think that like trusting those promptings that you have and the inclinations and the passion that you have, like doors will open and things do happen, and your passions and your interests are needed. It just might take a second before you find it.
Yeah, God gives us passion and interest for a reason. I don't think that
Yes.
we are given them to then just do nothing with them. There's a purpose
Yeah.
for our interests and desires, and He has created you for this purpose. I'm sure there's lots of purposes, but I think it's pretty cool that this desire is now putting you in a place where you can impact your own faith community in how we peace build. And I feel like peace, again, I think this is so heavy on my mind because it feels like the pinnacle of Christianity to be a
Mm.
peacemaker. I love that that was an emphasis from President Nelson because our world is so much in conflict. But to be the light on a hill, to be the people that are actively building and making peace is a marked difference from the world right now. And we
Yeah.
need to be that for the world.
I totally agree. I think that the recent like emphasis on being a peacemaker, like it gets me so excited. Like cuz I finally
I
feel like
bet.
the reason why I feel so drawn to conflict and peace is because it's like my theological roots. Like it's like this was like put in me my entire life. Like this is what we're called to do. And I think sometimes it just becomes an afterthought, or like sometimes it's just like a byproduct of following the gospel. But I'm like, no, this is like one of the hardest things that we're asked to do. I genuinely think that like people kind of look at peace and peacemaking as like nice and warm and feel good, but it's so hard if we take it seriously. And I think also the church has been so clear about this call and why we should do it, but not as much on the how. And I think that's like, I used to get frustrated at that. And now I'm like, no, I think that's good because it's up to all of us to figure out how we do it and what that looks like for us. And yeah, I just feel like a huge part of it is in the life of Jesus. Like he showed us what this looks like in a way that I don't even think I fully understand yet. Like, I think we've just tapped the surface of like what it means for Christ to be this peaceful example. But yeah, there's just so much there that I'm like really excited that it feels like we're getting more into it.
Yeah, that is seriously the end and the beginning of his life and ministry. I was reading the scriptures and seeing that, when his birth is announced, it's glory to God in the highest and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And then at the Last Supper, as he's talking to his apostles right before he's killed, he says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." And in the midst of great conflict, life on the line conflict, he offered peace. That feels transformational, like we've been
Yeah.
talking about. That's incredible.
I love that you pointed out it like started and ended with peace. I haven't really thought about it like that, but even just like with those two scriptures, like that, it just feels so important. And I think sometimes I'm like, we don't even understand how important this is. But I think that then you talked about the beginning and the end, but even like all throughout, everything he does is peace. I think I've talked a lot about peace as this like very active thing. And that's something that I see in Jesus. It's not this sitting back and keeping the peace and like, not ruffling any feathers, but it's he ruffled a ton of feathers. Like he went in
Yeah,
and
he
did
did.
things that were very revolutionary and that made a lot of people uncomfortable, including his own faith community and his own culture. And I think that's something we can learn from is just like it requires stepping in and being willing to like bring discomfort. And that's one of our worst fears, I think, for a lot of us is to create discomfort. But also, I think that maybe a more comfortable way of thinking about peace, too, that he shows us is peace is presence. Like, I love how many times that Jesus just is with people and doesn't say anything or doesn't have to do much, but he's just there and that feeling brings peace. And I think that Thich Nhat Hanh said, one of the greatest gifts that we can offer someone is our presence. And I feel like that also, like talking about space making earlier, like being with people in their suffering. And I think of the woman at the well, like that is peace as well, to just witness each other. And I love how Jesus shows that. I think also one that we fundamentally don't maybe realize a lot is peace as dignity and like asserting dignity. And a big way I see this is in the Sermon on the Mount. Christ gives a series of examples of, like, we're all very familiar with it. Like, when someone smites you on the cheek, let him smite you on the other. And I think often we read that as pacifism. Like, oh, we need to just not be violent and, take things patiently and humbly. And maybe this is more something people have heard a lot by this point. But in Jewish culture, doing things with your left hand meant that you were doing something unclean, like you did unclean acts or things below you with your left hand. And so when someone smites you on your right cheek, they're doing it with their left hand. And when you demand that they smite you on your other cheek, they'd have to use their right hand to smite you on the other cheek. That's like what this idea is. And the right hand is asserting you as an equal, or it's seeing you as an equal. So all these different examples, there's like Jewish customs to understand that what Jesus is saying is not to just sit by and let things happen to you, but to assert that you have dignity, that you're a human, that you are valued just as much as they are, you have as much worth as they do. And this idea that we are using violence on one another is like going against God at its most like fundamental aspect. Like that is to deny the worth of souls. Like that. Anyways, so this idea that we not just take things, but we assert our dignity without actually using violence in return is like a really beautiful image to me that I think is all over the Bible. And yet, like, that's not something that we talk about as much.
Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the intersection between personal peace inside and then creating peace in our communities, peace building. Because to assert dignity means you have to have a sense of dignity, right?
Yeah,
Um, so
exactly.
so where do you see the intersection in that personal peace versus peace building?
I don't think there's like a way to even separate the two. In my first few classes in grad school, that was something that was like really hit hard. It was like we had a whole class called Formations that was about you becoming a peace builder. Like that was like you developing inner peace so that you can actually do this work. And like how do you sustain yourself And how do you recognize what your identity is and how you show up at different places? What are your values? Like, that was a really important part. We had projects that were centered around our own conflicts. And here we are discussing systemic conflict and conflicts in the world and all these international aspects of what this looks like and systems. And here you are also looking at your conflict with your mom or your sister. And so it
That's
just feels
so vulnerable.
It's so vulnerable. Yeah, I think that all of us that went through this program at EMU feel this. We did not expect it to be as I went through an identity crisis constantly because I was constantly having to look at my own conflicts. Oh, also with this point, in my undergrad, I was so excited to take this first conflict class because I wanted to understand how you do it. And it was just crazy because I went into it thinking oh, I don't really have any conflicts right now. I'm more interested in this intellectually, but I don't have any conflicts in my life. By the end of the semester, I was I have so many conflicts that I have not even been paying attention to. Once you start looking for this and really paying attention to it, you realize how much conflict is in you, is around you. And I think that most of our conflicts outside of ourselves are really just a reflection of the conflict that's going on inside of us. I just think that we have to be aware of what's going on in ourselves, and shame resilience is a really big one. Usually you think of that as being dealt with in therapy, but I've had to really look at my own shame and look at my own inadequacies or feelings of inadequacy and self-worth, because it's constantly being examined when I'm trying to engage with people around me. And I have to keep bringing attention to that. And it never gets fixed or goes away, but you always have to just keep grounding yourself in your own peace and your own conflicts before you can then be engaging it with the other ways. So in order to show up the way that you want with people, it's so imperative that you're looking introspectively because it's going to affect things outside of you.
Can you define shame resilience? I don't think I've ever heard that term, and I think that sounds very interesting to me.
Yes. Basically, we do everything we can to not feel shame because shame is such an uncomfortable feeling. The difference between shame and guilt, as I'm sure you've heard, is shame is I am wrong, whereas guilt is I did something wrong. So guilt is a motivating emotion, but shame is debilitating, and it's also a lie. Shame attacks our self-worth or feelings of self-worth. So shame resilience is about letting yourself feel the shame and treating it as a little kid, right? Who's say your shame is this little kid that's just screaming at you or shouting things at you. How do you just realize that it's in pain? And how do you just hug the child instead of pushing it away or getting mad, right? So it's offering yourself compassion, those thoughts and that's part of you that's feeling that shame. How do you extend kindness and compassion to yourself? So there's a few more elements to shame resilience, but it's this idea that you are acquainted with it and you are responding to it in a way.
You turn towards it.
Yes, exactly. You turn towards it instead of away from it, because otherwise it'll just still keep coming up for you.
Yeah, with a lot of curiosity. Because I think one thing with inner conflict is that we just have judgment. We are judgmental. And when people say, I don't judge people, I say, you're lying. Because I think it's just so innate to being human is that we are constantly making judgment calls about what's safe, what's okay, who we should be around or not be around. And it's subconscious. So when we recognize what's happening in our brains and then act with curiosity, then we can more intentionally think the next thought or take the action that we want to, rather than denying that we have judgment. It's that conflict work of the more you learn about conflict, the more you see, oh, I do have conflict in my heart and I need to confront it and get curious about it and work with it.
Yeah, and being open to that and not getting mad at yourself for having conflict. I think that's another thing is because we see conflict as bad, a lot of times that's what we've been brought up or conditioned to see conflict as this negative thing. We might look down on ourselves because we're experiencing conflict, when really that acceptance and that curiosity of just okay, conflict is going to happen, and how do I be curious and have the door open to it rather than just push it away and avoid looking at it.
Yeah, because looking at conflict in a curious way is then where growth can happen.
Exactly.
If we look away from it, then we are looking away from an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
So I want to jump in to hear your practical how-tos for me, because I want to better understand how I can be a peacemaker in action today, right now.
Yeah. I think this is what people want the most is like the practical skills and strategies and tools to deal with conflict. And I feel like I'm disappointing everyone when I like don't have concrete. Well, of course there's concrete skills and things that I teach, and this is part of the things that come up in the course, but I just really believe that those like steps and how-tos fall short in conflict because it's so messy, because there's so many emotions involved, because it's trying to hint at like a deeper level in us. And active listening or different strategies of communication are going to fall short unless we've first examined what conflict and what those feelings are in ourselves. So I kind of like thinking of it as a creative process and think of you as an artist when you navigate conflict rather than like scientifically trying to figure out how to perfect it. So most of my things that I'm going to say are from that perspective of looking at it in a creative way. And first, I love the metaphor of conflict as a mirror that shows you what you care about. So it's reflecting back to you what your values are, like what your beliefs are, what your worldviews are, your relationships that you care about. So oftentimes when I have a conflict and I actually sit down and look at it, I'm realizing what it's reflecting back to me. This is a common one for me, is my autonomy. Like maybe I'm not feeling like I am the one making a choice, or I don't have control over a situation. Anyways, there's a lot of different scenarios where autonomy feels like the value that's being threatened. So once I realize that, I'm like, oh, okay, this now gives me more ability to respond because I recognize that what I need is to kind of protect that value I have of me as an individual making my own choices. Those values become a lot clearer when we see conflict as a reflection point to what we care about. Another aspect of this, there's a Joy Harjo. She was a poet laureate, a poem that she wrote. And the last line, or I guess the first line, it says, "An enemy must be worthy of engagement." And if you think about it, we have enemies. And I think there's a lot of us who are like, probably don't identify with that word enemy, but you can think of groups or just people that are hard for you to get along with. Those people, there's a reason why you're in conflict with them. And it's because you care about them, or you care about what they're doing, or you care about, like, especially interpersonal conflicts. Like you're having a reoccurring conflict with your sister because you care about her. If you didn't, you would have apathy and that conflict wouldn't even be there, right? And so I think that's like a really beautiful thing, that the person you're in conflict with is worthy of engagement. Like there's someone that is worth the time and energy that you're going to put into this conflict. And so even just like that reframing, I think is really beautiful. And also with that, I think one of the biggest you've mentioned it several times already, but one of the biggest things that we can offer ourselves to get out of this stuck place of being in conflict is curiosity. Because often our conflicts come because we're making assumptions about the other person, or we're storytelling, or we're deciding what they think and what they feel before we even ask them. Or when we're in conversation, we're already having all these assumptions without actually stopping and listening and being a witness to what they're feeling. And so curiosity might seem way too simple, but I think that is a very essential step into actually seeing the other person.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that a lot of the skills are about self-reflection, not even necessarily about how we talk, which I'm sure is also vital to peace building, peacemaking, but so much of the success in peace building is in how we reflect and prepare inside of ourselves.
Yes, and I think that can feel equally like frustrating, but also really empowering, because one of the most common questions I get, or questions that I've had, is what happens if you're being peaceful and you're doing all the things and the other person doesn't want to engage, or keeps avoiding, or keeps treating me this way? Like that's where you get so stuck, because you're putting all of your heart and soul into making this conflict something better than what it is. And yet you're not, you're like, it's a two-person thing, right? So the question is, can you have conflict transformation when the other person isn't willing? I argue that like conflict transformation is possible even when the other person isn't willing, because what you're doing is you're transforming your own feelings towards them, and you're transforming how you think about them and how you think about yourself and how you're going to show up. And that's a lot more empowering, and it doesn't depend on the other person's actions, because we have no control over that, right? We have no control over what someone does. But the hope is that people will notice you responding differently and acting differently and being differently, and they'll get curious. And so then that hopefully that could take, a couple days or one interaction, or it could take years, right? But I think that is all we have control of. And yet that feels also empowering to me.
That is so beautiful. I have never thought about it that way. I love that so much. What do you feel like you have learned about Jesus Christ as you have pursued this path of peace building?
I shared a few things, right, that I feel like he shows us the how-to of peace building. But I think that this kind of just, it gets me so excited thinking about this, because he showed us an entirely different way of being in the world. Like I just mentioned, we can't control what other people do, but we can change how we are in this world. And I think often we're given two examples, or you can either fight back and engage in this like power struggle that the world does, right? You can show that you're better or keep fighting, or often we see people resort to violence, or you can just resign and just accept what's happening to you and just like be passive about it. And that sometimes feels like those are the only two things we have. But Jesus in his life shows us that there's this whole other way that we can be operating on. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. So it's not a call to reject the world, but to live in it more fully and like live in it the way that Jesus lived in it. Like the Mennonites are living in it, right? Like they are putting themselves in these situations, in these conflict zones where there's real harm happening, and they're asking how they can transform that, how they can make it better. And I think that's what Jesus does. It's not to reject the world, but to reject the way the world is telling us to do things, and to reject the power and the violent struggles, but this idea of nonviolent resistance. So kind of just thinking about this, like the people who had been hearing about him long before his birth, they expected him to come and overturn the government and create a new way of being. So they wanted him to fight against the Romans, but he didn't do that. And at the same time, he wasn't complicit in what the system was. He had a much bigger perspective and kingdom in mind. And that's what he's asking us to do, is to not go along with the way that things are, and also not to just shut ourselves away from it, but to really actively be a part of this like paradigm shift. And that to me feels like peace. Like that feels like the work of peace. And the way that he does that, as I explained before, is asserting dignity and asserting the dignity of all humans. I think if we're not doing that, if we're not seeing the worth of souls, and what we're doing isn't contributing to this idea that all humans have dignity, then that is never going to be peaceful. And we're never going to come to this relationship of peace. And so that includes our enemies. It includes the people that we are struggling with. If we can't see their well-being wrapped up in our well-being, then we're falling short of what Jesus was doing, which of course we're going to do because it's so hard.
But I love that what you're pointing out is that he operated with the knowledge of the worth of someone else and the dignity of someone else. And that is a key part of how he engaged in
Yeah.
peacemaking and peace building, was knowing and understanding and acting under the knowledge of someone's worth and value. And that changes everything.
Yeah, even to the point of him dying. And he said, forgive them for they know not what they do. Like he was offering them dignity in that moment, even the people that ended his life in a very brutal way and punished the people that he loved. Like that, I don't think there's anything more radical and more like awe-inspiring than that.
Well, thank you so much, Maybree, for coming on the show, and tell us where we can find your peace building courses. I'm so excited about them.
Yeah, so this is through Mormon Women for Ethical Government. So there is a way that you can join Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and it's really easy. There's a link that I'm sure you can post that people can follow. But we'd love to have you as part of the community, and then the courses will be offered. They'll be rolling out in the future weeks and months as we get them more off the ground. But yeah, we're going to create a lot of resources and a lot of ways that people can engage and really think about their conflicts. in a very sustaining way, and we hope that you have a community to do it with. So I can't think of a better community than MWEG.
Love that. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
If you were thinking about someone as you were listening to this podcast, I would invite you to send them this episode and invite them to have a conversation with you. See what you can do with conflict with these tools we've talked about. Please also consider leaving a review, a comment, or rating the podcast. That helps this message get out to more people. All my love till next time.